Yeah. My
I
son,
go with him.
has blonde hair.
Welcome to the Wednesday, January 18th work session. Today's session is Envision Eugene, Economic Development, and I'll turn it over to the city manager.
Thank you, Councilor Brown. And what I will do is turn over to Jason. He and Mike will lead us through a presentation, and then I know there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers.
Great. Thank you. My name is Jason Dedrick with the Planning Division, here once again on Envision Eugene. We're going to talk broadly about employment lands today, but also specifically around industrial lands. In essence, what we're trying to do and what we've been doing over the last several work sessions on this topic is to get you familiar with the components that go into determining our land need on the employment side. Today, a little more on the industrial side. And so the last few of those components will be the focus of today, and then you will have kind of heard everything leading up to the recommendation. So what I'll do is kind of quickly overview what the presentation will be and where we are in the process. After I do that, I'll kick it over to Mike Sullivan, who will talk about the Joint Elected Officials Regional Prosperity Plan, what's going on with that, and the impacts that that may have on determining our land need. I'll also talk about determining our employment growth rate over the next 20 years and its impact on our industrial land need, and then talk about some of our next steps from here. So just as a reminder of the 7 pillars, we're spending our time today on the economic opportunities pillar. That relates to both commercial and industrial lands. The important thing to note again about the pillars is that they are all interwoven. Talking about one isn't only talking about one. All of them are here. So again, commercial and industrial lands make up our employment lands. There's been a lot of work recently on determination of our land need on these fronts. On the commercial end of things, one of our key components is determining what our commercial redevelopment rate will be in the future to meet that goal of meeting all of our commercial land need inside the urban growth boundary. So there's been a tremendous amount of staff and committee work on that, and you'll get a more full update on that at an upcoming work session. There's also been work by the Economic Development Committee around industrial lands, and so we'll update you on a bit of that work. As I mentioned before, the JEO plan really establishes our goals, strategies, and actions going forward. And so what Mike will talk about are what some of these actions are that are currently ongoing. And again, I'll talk to you about our employment growth rate and its relation to industrial land need. So at this point, I'm going to kick it over to Mike to talk about the Regional Prosperity Plan.
Thanks. Today I'm going to provide a short review of the JEO Regional Prosperity Economic Development Plan and an update on the work underway to help achieve the goals of that plan. And lastly, I'll try to finish on issues that relate directly to today's Envision Eugene topics. You recall that the Council worked with the City of Springfield and Lane County as the joint elected officials on the development of the Regional Prosperity Plan. Work was considered in a community workshop attended by over 300 citizens and then finalized by the JEO back in February of 2010. The plan was organized around some ambitious goals: create 20,000 jobs by the year 2020, reduce unemployment to or above the state average, and increase the average wage to or above the state average. Further, the plan focused on 6 specific strategies. I'm going to review these strategies and briefly describe the actions, most of which are underway, to advance each one of them. I want to emphasize that the implementation of this plan is being undertaken as a dynamic partnership that includes not just the jurisdictions, but the chambers of Eugene and Springfield, Lane Community College, the Workforce Partnership, the Lane Metro Partnership, and the U of O, all playing important roles. So I'm going to move on to the first strategy, which is grow local economic opportunities. The strategy recognizes the vital role of local small business startups and expansions as a prime source of near-term job growth. Actions to date have concentrated on providing business information and technical assistance and enhancing access to capital. Go over a few of these. The Lane Business Link. This is a web-based one-stop source of business development resources. The site had a soft launch in October of 2011 and has attracted hundreds of visits since that time. The project was led by LCC and the Eugene Chamber and this was a specific next step called for in the plan. Microenterprise development. EDEV provides training and financing resources to encourage the growth of Lane County microenterprises. Those are businesses with 5 or fewer employees. The city has contracted with EDEV for these services to Eugene-based entrepreneurs for several years, but after the JEO plan was put in place, the contract was expanded to support the goals of that plan as well as to respond to current economic conditions. This is access to capital. Business Development Fund. The BDF is the city's primary tool to assist the expansion of local businesses. This successful revolving loan fund has been in operation for many years, but access to capital has become increasingly critical in our current economic climate. Focused effort in the BDF over the last 24 months have produced 18 loans with a total value of $1.4 million, matched by private investment of around $14 million, with 130 jobs projected as a result. The Lane Council of Governments also has a not revolving loan fund, but offers a number of financing instruments using state and federal programs. They operate on a county-wide basis, which matches the area of the regional plan. During that same 24-month period, LCOG has closed 41 loans with a capital value of $15.5 million, matched by $28 million in private investment, and these are projected to result in the creation of 250 jobs. I'm going to move on to the next strategy in the plan, energize the creative economy. We have a rich tradition of innovation and creative enterprise. The JEO plan seeks to build on this strength as a focus for future economic growth. Actions have focused on incubating businesses and business ideas through intensive training, mentoring, and peer networks, as well as providing place-based incubators. Lastly, by providing a path to venture and angel investment. First action under this category, the Smart Up Academy. The Eugene Chamber has developed this program to work with a group of local high-growth young businesses, taking them through a training and mentorship curriculum and developing a peer support network with the goal of making them investment ready and also building their sales. This is a form of business incubation. It's an incubator without walls, if you will. The program will have an initial class of around 10 businesses and will be ready to kick off on February 17th. This program is funded in part by the city. I should mention that this academy is based on a similar program that's successfully underway in the Portland area. In terms of more traditional incubation, there are a couple of efforts underway. NEDCO, the Neighborhood Economic Development Corporation, and EDEV are collaborating on the Hatch Incubator in downtown Springfield, which accommodates up to 4 businesses of an office and retail character, together with support programs to help those businesses and programs that provide access to capital. In Eugene, the Beam Development, which I should mention is now taking tenants, has built out the second floor to include flex space.
What's the number you can call?
I should have it here.
Yeah, you should have that number.
The second floor of the Beam building provides flex space, meant to accommodate small creative companies with flexible floor plans and affordable finishes. The building now houses 2 software startups, a biomedical spin-off, and a collaborative space for independent software developers, all located on Beam's second floor. Moving on, the Southern Willamette Angel Network is a program sponsored by the Chamber that connects early-stage businesses with angel and venture investors within the region. The program assists companies with business plan review and investor presentations. This process culminates each year in the Willamette Angel Conference, also sponsored by the Chamber, when promising companies compete for large investment opportunities. The goal of both of these programs is to more actively support investment in and the growth of entrepreneurial businesses in our region. Well, come on now. The third strategy, we're backing up. We're finding it. It's the next one. There you go. Is a workforce development strategy, invest in tomorrow's talent. As the economy develops and shifts, the training needs of workers and businesses will also change and shift. Investing in the region's workforce is a fundamental step to support personal prosperity of workers and business growth in general. There are several actions underway to support this strategy. The Green Jobs Task Force. This group was convened by the Workforce Partnership and charged to identify employment opportunities and training needs in emerging areas of green business. The group's work points to emerging and exciting opportunities in reuse and recycling, green construction, biomass production, and the relocalization of food. Workforce Partnership will act on these findings as they move forward to meet the area workforce development needs. Another initiative in this to support this strategy is the National Career Readiness Certificate, also a program of the Workforce Partnership. It's being promoted, it's a testing program that certifies math and reading skills being promoted to young people and others who are seeking to enter or re-enter the workforce. Also, it's being promoted to employers. Employers that commit to this program pledge to value the certificate as evidence of important training when they make hiring decisions. Lastly, under this strategy, the new LCC Downtown Campus. Downtown Campus is a bold step forward enhancing the accessibility of language training, vocational and other job-related training. The downtown site will also house LCC's Energy Management Program, a premier green technology program providing training and support for green construction and green building management professionals. I'm going to depart from the order of the plan and flip strategy 4 in the plan to the end because I think it makes a better segue to your discussion this afternoon about Envision Eugene. Fifth area in the plan is identify as a place to thrive. This is an economic identity concept, capturing an image, both cultural and economic, that resonates with the community and is compelling to the region and beyond. This is very difficult work. Much remains to be done on this, but progress has been made in 2 important areas. Downtown development. Plan highlighted the importance of urban vitality, active downtown cores to retaining and attracting business investment, particularly the emerging breed of tech-based and creative businesses. We've been very focused on this task. Now there's almost $100 million in new investments under construction in the downtown core. Beam Development, Bennett, the Woolworth Building, LCC, and the Inn at the Fifth all promise to be new focal points of activity for our downtown. Redevelopment of the Taco Time Building and the 858 Pearl Building will bring new residents to the downtown core. These projects, which have all been financially supported by the city and the Urban Renewal Agency, are bringing a wave of progress to the downtown that's truly changing the profile of the downtown. Important steps forward. $100 million in investment, 450 construction jobs, projected 350 permanent jobs concentrated in downtown, and over 300 new residents into our downtown core. The other area of progress on this strategy is the food initiative. Fresh food and the value-added processing of food appear to represent real economic development opportunities. But beyond that, the products for which the region is known and our support for agriculture and local food seem to be a very important part of the community's persona. There's a certain authenticity to this. The food initiative, led by Lane County, will build on completed market research, engage growers and producers, complete a cluster analysis and strategy, and identify strategic investments and programmatic supports to strengthen the food industry. To support food as part of an economic identity, the initiative will seek ways to brand the region and its products to foster the connection between food and place and build on the regional themes of health and well-being. The sixth strategy in the plan has to do with strengthening key industries. The JEO, using the research that was previously conducted by the Workforce Partnership, focused down on 5 key industries: clean tech, renewable resources, health and wellness, advanced manufacturing, software, and biomedical. Based on industry location patterns, our region was judged to have a high probability of seeing growth in these sectors. These are also industry groups that have strong worker earning potential, thus supporting our goal around increased median family income. Work has been underway on the following actions. Chamber, working with an economic consultant, completed a deeper review of the cluster industry data for our region, and the findings of that review largely confirmed the work of the Workforce Partnership and the direction of the JEO. Study recommended specific strategies be developed around biosciences, environmental services, waste remediation, specialized manufacturing, food processing and food manufacturing, and software and IT services. Also, in support of key industries, the Chamber's Regional Prosperity Initiative is an effort promoting business alliance in key industries, clusters, and business associations, providing support for early-stage companies in these cluster areas, and creating a proactive focus on taking care of and supporting existing traded sector companies. This is all part of the Chamber's ongoing economic development and job creation effort to build on the region's strengths. Next step forward in looking at clusters, the city will be working with Springfield and Lane County to follow up on the research of the Chamber and the Workforce Partnership to refine our understanding of the region's competitive advantages and develop strategies to support the growth and development of industry clusters. This work both implements the JEO plan while advancing the economic agenda that's part of the Lane Livability Consortium work plan. Now, as promised, I'm going to jump back to strategy number 4 in the plan, which is provide for the basic needs of business. The focus of this strategy is to strengthen the links between planning, transportation, and infrastructure investments with economic development goals. Action to date has focused on steps forwards in brownfield redevelopment and comprehensive planning. Redevelopment of industrial brownfields could represent an important source of sites for future business location. The city has applied together with Springfield and Lane County for EPA funds to inventory and assess brownfield conditions and redevelopment potential. The city is also working with the state DEQ to identify sites that might be eligible for funding through a state brownfield assistance program. On the comprehensive planning side, we have Envision Eugene. The health of our industrial and commercial sectors is at the very heart of the community's economy. Envision Eugene is examining the adequacy of land supplies to meet the needs of these sectors over the next 20 years. JEO plan calls for tying these decisions to goal outcomes around job creation and family incomes. Key industries discussed in the plan have varied requirements with respect to siting needs. Take clean tech for an example. Business Oregon, the state's economic development office, has provided information about the siting of clean tech companies, one of the JEO target industries. This matrix gives you a good feel for the typical site needs for this type of company. And you'll notice, I will point to it if my clicker was working, but it's not. In the middle of that matrix, there's a column that lists the acres that were used by each one of those companies when they located in various places. Business Oregon also provided information about companies locating on Oregon certified sites. These are sites, all of which are at least 25 acres in area and have gone through a pre-certification process with the state. So this is relatively large lot development. Though more varied in business type, this will give you an idea of the recent business growth activity on large single sites in Oregon. These examples highlight the importance of both total land supply as well as size and configuration of available sites as important variables when considering land supply needs in the light of economic development goals. So a lot of work is underway to push the JEO plan forward. I think this marks a good transition point to discuss the Envision Eugene topics for today.
Thanks, Mike. So, as I mentioned before, there are a host of factors that go into helping us determine our industrial land need. You've just heard an update on one of the key ones, which is how we implement our regional prosperity plan. The importance of those activities is that this is not a plan on the shelf. This is a plan that we are implementing with partners. There are things happening. And these things were intended to happen as a way to change our unemployment and change our average wage. So as these things are happening, it tends to drive needs in the community, and those may be land needs. And so it's important for us to think about what these actions mean for what we may need in terms of land and the companies that we might be targeting. So there are also other issues that we have updated you on that go into determining our industrial land need. Previously, we've talked with you about our land supply, what's currently available, how it's configured, what the constraints are. We've talked about how we've used industrial land in the past. We've also talked about demand that's gone unmet, companies that have either not been able to expand or have left the community. And we've also talked about the targeted industries in the JEO plan that we're seeking to help raise our average wage. What are the land needs of those industries? A couple things we haven't talked about yet that we will today are the importance of employment growth rate on predicting job growth and land need, as well as the employment share. And so I'll talk about both of those here, and that will kind of complete the full suite of things that impact industrial land need. So employment growth rate, you can think of this as being analogous to population growth on the housing side. It is the key driver of how many jobs we anticipate having and helps us determine the land needed for those jobs. As has been noted previously, there are 2 safe harbor values that are available to cities to use. I'll review what those are. There's also the option for cities to create their own forecast based on local conditions if they choose to not use one of those safe harbors. So those safe harbor values are values that the state supports and says that they will accept if a city decides to use one of those. The first safe harbor that's available is the Oregon Employment Department's forecast for the county, in this case for Lane County, and the safe harbor is the most recent forecast that's been published. When we began our work on ECLA, the Eugene Comprehensive Lands Assessment, the most recent forecast was for the 2006 to 2016 period. That forecast was for 1.4% annual growth. That forecast has been superseded by the next forecast, which was for 08 to 18, with an annual growth rate of 0.9%. It's important to note that in conversations with state staff, they noted that that growth rate was lower than our typical growth rate, primarily because we were at that time hopefully in the depth of the recession, and that employment growth was projected to be relatively slow. So just last month, the most recent forecast has come out, which is the 2010 to 2020 forecast for 1.6% annual growth in employment in Lane County. This is now officially our safe harbor value. Again, similar to the 0.9, it's important to note that this rate is higher than our overall long-term growth, primarily because it's expected we will add jobs faster coming out of the recession over the next 10 years. It's also important to note that this forecast is for a 10-year period. Even though the state has cities planned for the 20-year period, this 10-year forecast is still the safe harbor value. The other safe harbor that's available to us is our population forecast, which is our Lane County coordinated forecast, which for the 2011 to 2031 period is 0.9% annual growth. So those two numbers, the 1.6 OED forecast safe harbor and the 0.9% population safe harbor, are the two values that are available to us and that the state will accept. Those other numbers shown in red there are no longer relevant, although there is obviously the coincidence that the old forecast is the same as our population forecast. So some comments on the safe harbor values. Again, the OED forecast is only for 10 years. It also doesn't account for what's happening locally. So the state doesn't go around every county and say, what are your policies, what are you planning on doing, and adjust growth rates based on that. It's more of a global statewide forecast that they then apportion out to counties. On the coordinated population forecast, in our case, as the job center for the county, our employment growth has typically been faster than our population growth, primarily because we have growth in jobs for people that don't necessarily live here. They live in surrounding communities, Springfield or other areas. So we tend to grow jobs faster than we grow population here. As I mentioned, there is another option, which is that a city can create its own employment growth forecast. Many cities do this. It is a common choice. It's probably about 50-50 between cities choosing the safe harbor values and choosing their own forecast. Again, the state will support and approve your own forecast. There is precedent for that. You just need to provide justification for why you feel that forecast is appropriate. And cities that typically do this usually utilize and base their forecast on the information from OED and the population forecast, so that it's not baseless. It's based in something that's out there and that's known. So some examples of how these different employment growth rates have an impact on our employment growth and thereby our land need. This is just an example using these two safe harbor values. If we were to move forward assuming an employment growth rate of 1.6% For example, we would be accommodating about 8,000 new industrial jobs over the next 20 years.
Annually or total?
Total, over the 20-year period. If we were to go forward with the 0.9% growth rate, again, the safe harbor, that would be about 4,300 new industrial jobs. The point here is total over the 20-year period, yes. The point here is not so much the actual number, but to display the sensitivity of this assumption. Any change in growth rate clearly has a pretty significant change in the number of jobs we're planning for. So this becomes an important variable going forward.
Is that just industrial? Is industrial
Correct.
commercial?
It's just the industrial portion of that. So another key component in addition to employment growth is our employment share. Think of this as similar to housing mix. How are our jobs portioned out between key sectors in the community? Our current share of jobs is as follows. We have about 18% in industrial, 54% commercial, 13% retail, and 14% government. The assumption coming out of ECLA was that our share of employment would continue at that same rate into the future. However, with the JEO plan now in place and the strategies and actions that are already occurring, it's worth examining if perhaps those actions may change this share. For example, would targeting some industries, would that perhaps result in a higher share of industrial jobs in the future? So this is an important thing for us to examine going forward.
Is this number pre or post the massive loss in manufacturing jobs?
It's probably, well, this number as of 06 employment data. So this share may have changed, and we are getting the 2010 employment data.
You gave us a presentation with a massive loss in manufacturing jobs. Which one was that, pre or post to 2006?
We presented when there had been that loss of jobs, yeah, which was kind of 06 to 2010, and I don't know, we haven't updated the share based on that loss.
So this is before?
This is before, and that it could be different. So what are the impacts of that employment share on our land need? Similar to employment growth rate, it has a pretty significant impact. So let's just take, for example, again, 18% of our current jobs are industrial, with that note that was just brought up that we'll update that share. If we took, for example, the 1.6% growth rate and our current share of industrial jobs, as I mentioned, we would have about 8,000 new industrial jobs. However, if we were to be successful with our strategies in the JEO plan and perhaps had a higher percentage of industrial jobs, let's assume 20% of our jobs became industrial, not just 18%. You can see that that's an additional 3,300 new jobs. So again, similar to the employment growth rate, the share of employment across these sectors is important as you're trying to figure out jobs, which then translate into land need.
Can I just make one clarification and make sure I know? When you say that 11,300 new jobs, that just means more shifts to the industrial. The bottom line total remains the same, but there's maybe less commercial or less
Correct.
retail.
Correct. Yeah.
It's zero sum.
Right.
Right.
For example,
That's over 20 years, not 10, right?
correct. So what does this mean for our industrial lands methodology? Previously, our methodology has been based primarily on a portfolio of sites. This is still an important tool. It's important to have the right number of sites in the right arrangement with the right characteristics for the industries you're targeting. However, it's important perhaps to move beyond that. Our meetings with the Economic Development Committee last fall suggested trying to work on a methodology that more directly linked actual job growth to site needs. We are currently in progress on that work right now. We will be sending that work out to that Economic Development Subcommittee, who will review that, meet on that, and provide comments back to us that will then inform the recommendation that we bring forward. So where do we go from here? We are continuing to move forward with the assumption that the JEO plan is our basis for our economic development strategy. When we go forward and make our full proposal to both here and then submit that paperwork to the state, we need to elaborate on what our economic development objectives are. We will be doing that based on the policies that are in the JEO plan and based on the actions that we've already reviewed that we're taking. So that's an important note going forward. Again, our employment growth rate will drive our land need, so our recommendation will include what we think the employment growth rate will be going forward. Again, subcommittee work is continuing. They will review that employment growth rate and industrial land need data. That will inform what we bring back to you next month. And then your feedback today, any questions or comments you may have, we will directly refer that back to the committees to make sure that they hear your comments and your guidance, your feedback, so that that can inform their work. And that's it.
We'll open up for comment. Mike, first.
Thank you, George. Hey, thank you very much both for the presentation. This gets at all of the questions I think I had the last time we had an Envision Eugene discussion, and I was asking if we could start connecting some of the dots. This does that very well, and I appreciate the conversation very much. So, some of the points I want to bring up. At the beginning, you talked about the JEO's work as having an aspirational goal of the creation of 20,000 new jobs within 10 years and not 20. At the end of this, we were talking about the land additions and percentages that would get us over 20 years as opposed to 10. One of the things we also don't take into consideration with that is the timing for the approval of that JEO aspirational goal was prior to the loss of another 5,000 or 6,000 jobs within the region. So we're realistically talking about having an approved policy goal of trying to create 25,000 or 26,000 new jobs in the next 10 years, right? I mean, that's what the policy that's going to drive. And at the end here, you said that the employment growth rate will drive the land need that we're going to create, right? Okay, so let's start doing the math. Near as I can tell, we're talking about a fairly large difference from what we've planned to this point, and this is what I'm hopeful the council can get into and start doing the math on. If that 1.6%, almost doubled from our last assumption, rate gets us 8,000 new jobs in the next 20 years, my question is, what's the rate that gets us to 26,000 new jobs in 10 years? What's the rate? Can you tell me off the top of your head?
I can't, but I will also say that the commercial jobs are part of that job growth that was forecasted by the JEO plan. So
Okay.
it's, and we, based on our share, we typically have we're looking at growing about 3 times as many commercial jobs as we are industrial jobs. So, for example, at that 1.6% rate, we talked about 8,000 industrial jobs. That's about 25,000 commercial jobs.
Well, we've also talked about the fact that the massive change over time has been the loss of manufacturing and industrial jobs. And these numbers, the 18% figure, is, as you just said, is prior to the loss of so many of those. So I'll look forward to an updated percentage analysis before we start talking about what land needs we'll have to grow.
Just a couple of quick comments back on that,
Okay.
too. Is, remember the JEO plan is a region-wide plan, too, and so
Right.
there's... so
Counties
we're-
involved and so is Springfield.
Right, that also. One thing, just to piggyback on what Jason mentioned about the share of the jobs, why I think that's really important is one of our goals is average median income, and increasing average median income often requires a more industrial type of job as opposed to some of the other jobs. And so it may mean that we need to shift more of our jobs into industrial. So it may not be 18%, it could be the 20% or whatever the right number is to ensure that we also hit
Well, and
that
even if
goal.
we're getting to 24 or 25% from what is likely today, closer to what? If 18 was before the massive change, then if we're 12 today, we need to double it to get to an appropriate number. The other piece to consider, too, that I think is important is that Springfield has already decided that they're going to add 600 acres for industrial. We're balking at 600 at, 150% their size or what have you. We've had some tight discussion over 600. I think we should be considering a much bigger number. And I think our success in our goals are something we should also consider here. We've talked about these targeted initial cluster groups that we'd like to do better in, that we'd like to add land to be able to have success with waste remediation, food processing, and software and IT. But instead, we're not looking at growing. We're losing companies in each of those categories and have over the last couple of years in Rexius, Grain Millers, and Semantic. So we're actually moving backwards, not forwards. So I hope our numbers can see some real wholesale shift from what we're planning at the moment.
Okay, Chris?
Thank you. Great presentation. I'm really pleased with how we're starting to begin to focus in. It's been a lot of work. I'm particularly interested in the assumptions about the shares of different kinds of jobs, because sheer numbers of jobs is extremely important, but the types of jobs. In my other life, I'm very interested in the financial stability, the kinds of salaries people are being paid, the payroll and the benefits. If we have enormous numbers of minimum wage jobs, that's really not going to help out. So I'm intrigued by the industrial, commercial, retail, government mix, because obviously some sectors pay better, have higher benefits, and produce better jobs. Is there a traded sector component in commercial? Does commercial include a traded sector component? Or is it really?
I'm not sure. I'll let Mike answer.
Well, if you think
Make
about
stuff and sell it.
if you think about the targeted industries that were in the original plan, health and wellness is really a mix of commercial and traded sector because we operate on a regional basis. Biomedical, although it's kind of commercial in character, is very much an industry and very much a traded sector. So it is a mix.
Yeah, see, that's what I'm trying to get at, because you say, well, industrial, if you think of industrial as the only source for high-pay, high-benefit jobs, you're looking at a fairly small. But if you can push that into the commercial area and you can see higher wages, higher benefits, better quality jobs, you're now expanding the playing field in which you can go for high-paying jobs. So I would be interested in knowing what kind of traction we could get within the commercial sectors for high-pay, successful jobs. Because for me, a lot of it's going to be around payroll, benefits, that kind of stuff, which gets to another point about the notion of how many acres we need versus what some of our other neighbors may need. If we think Springfield has this many acres, so we need to have this many acres, that could be very viable from the standpoint of property taxes. Because if we get the site, we get the property taxes, and that's definitely something we have to consider. But when you look at the payroll, if somebody has a job anywhere in this area, they're spending their payroll in this area. So if they're employed in Springfield, they're still spending their money in Eugene. So I want to look at this from the property tax standpoint. I think that's a definite thing to look at. But that gets back to my original kind of central point, which is around payroll. I want as many high-paying, high-benefit jobs as we can get, because that money has a multiplier effect and it will be spent locally, whether it's in Eugene or Springfield or wherever. So I'm very interested in what we can do around industrial jobs, and I think we need to be very thoughtful about that. But anything we can do to get leverage within the commercial sector as well, because right now over half the jobs in the area are commercial. And there may be some great opportunities in that in terms of increasing payroll and benefits. But retail jobs, which is where a lot of folks go because it's quick and easy, are not necessarily the jobs that produce the best outcome for the community. And so I'm really interested in what you can do, how we can support that, not only in terms of land, but also in terms of sector focus. And I would try to see is there some traction we can get.
Okay. Andrea?
Thank you. Well, Chris kind of said what I was thinking about. I hadn't quite thought how I was going to say it, though, but I'm interested in the overall health of the community. And how that happens is, there's different facets to every problem or every issue. I do want the tax base, as he puts it, but more than that, I want jobs that have benefits. When I was in Texas, Governor Perry was very proud of the fact that he had the lowest unemployment rate in the country, but there was no talk about what that meant. I mean, we're talking about people who are earning $2.65 an hour, depending on their tips to live. That isn't success to me. What success to me is that people that can actually, that have benefits and can pay their own way. I'm also curious about, we talk about commercial jobs and the fact that they're not benefited positions. Is there in this conversation a piece of how is the business community looking at a different way to probably support that at all? Because in other communities, and Chris can speak to knows what I'm talking about. There was this theory of a tri-share where the business owner would actually pay a portion to for a medical home, so to speak, and then the employee would pay, and it wouldn't be like traditional insurance where there's no limits, but it's kind of like a health benefit. And so I'm just curious if that part of it, to me, that would kind of alleviate some of that issue with commercial jobs and retail jobs that don't have the capability of offering that benefit. And I think that this is really would be an important piece of that. I mean, if you look at what Bend did with their, with their tri-share, they've been pretty successful in pulling people on. And of course, it's it's a limited benefit, but it is still something. So, if we're going down that road, I think that would be something that would be beneficial. But, I'm not too concerned about where the jobs are. I do want the tax base, but I really just want stable jobs for our community.
Okay. Alan?
I agree with what Chris and Andrea have just said. I think that's exactly both captured where I'm coming from as well. I think what we need to be talking about is family wage jobs with benefits. And it's not necessarily, where exactly they are, as opposed to, building up the regional economy. That's why we have a regional plan. And so having that regional look makes a lot of sense to me. And so when we look at what Springfield's doing and what Lane County's doing, a good example, and incorporating that into our plan, a good example is what's happening in Glenwood. I mean, that seems like a logical place to have industrial growth happen, whether it's in or out of our city limits is yet to be determined, and I think it's kind of a negotiation with the county and the county commissioners. And so those things need to be looked at on a regional basis. I too am interested in the updated share numbers that we get from those. I think it's shifted a little bit, but I understand the difference between an aspirational goal and a goal that we're using for planning purposes. So there's planning and aspirational goals, and I think we should have aspirational goals that have that push the envelope. But I don't think that those goals are what gets transferred into the land use process in making 20-year irrevocable decisions based on aspirations as opposed to what's real and what the data can support. I mean, we might want to double the amount of jobs, but that might not be a realistic approach to putting in it as the rate for employment growth. I think the numbers that we're seeing here are probably realistic and justifiable. On slide what slide was that? You had a key industry slide that we had. What were the key industries that you had, Mike?
The ones we started off with were clean tech and renewables. I think that shifted to recycling and reuse. Health and wellness is not as emphasized after the first round of work that came through the chamber. Advanced manufacturing got refined to specialized manufacturing, which is very similar. Software had IT appended to it, and biomedical became biosciences.
Okay.
Oh, and then there was food manufacturing, food processing and manufacturing.
I liked your food slide. Half of it was beer. Identity. Half of it was beer.
I don't know if you noticed that piece that went through the council newsletter about Ninkasi. Ninkasi's a great local success story. They're one of the fastest brewers in the country at this point. Their products are award-winning. They're growing hand over fist.
Right. And I understand we have a new brewery in town, too, that's opening up.
Mm-hmm.
So we're becoming a little hub of breweries. The last question I had was around the methodology and the subcommittee that's working on that. Do you know who's on that committee?
It's a fairly large committee. It's an economic development subgroup. They came directly out of the community resource group. There might be, 15 members on that committee.
Can you get us that?
Yeah, I can get you that list. Yeah.
Committee list. And the timeline for them finishing up this work?
We are hoping that they will meet here at the end of this month, like perhaps the last week of this month, first week of February, and then that work will be what informs our work going forward on a recommendation.
And the city manager's recommendation, we're scheduled for that in
February, end of February, 22nd.
22nd of February, work session. Okay. That's still going to hold? I mean, when they changed the 0.9 to 1.6, that made you start all over with all your number crunching, didn't it?
I don't. That's kind of a Jason question, but it does require some updates and some new information that gets fed into the model.
The spreadsheet just puts in new numbers.
In essence, that's kind of what it is, but it merits a good discussion.
Out into everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Simple switch of numbers. Okay. Thanks.
Okay. Pat?
Thank you, George. I often think about something that Councillor Zelenka talks about, and that's the gold ring. And when we're talking about adding industrial jobs, looking to attract new industry into the area. And obviously that is a way to bring in new jobs. But I also go back to something that Councillor Clark said, that our net industrial jobs based upon local companies is shrinking, and pointed to a couple of different industries, both in food and in and the services. So we can't really lose track of the fact that just by saying we want industrial jobs, we're going to get industrial jobs. We have to put the effort into creating the incentive for local companies to stay here, creating the incentive for other companies to locate here. And if you look at the chart that shows the size of properties that have attracted companies throughout the nation, we really don't have properties the size that are necessary even to keep Rexius in town, let alone attract people from outside to bring new jobs. So we can't really lose track of the fact that we have disincented through the years people to even stay here, let alone people to come here. So we have to always keep our eye on the ball that we can't just say we're going to get new jobs and get them automatically. We have to do the things and create the policies that want businesses to stay here, want businesses to relocate here. So I think Councillor Pryor brings up a good point that wherever the property taxes are paid, the payroll is spent more regionally, and there's a higher likelihood of payroll being spent if industrial land if jobs are created in Springfield, the payroll may be spent in Eugene, but it may not be spent in Eugene. People tend to spend money closer to their home, so just allowing it to happen in Springfield or in Glenwood or around us in Junction City, for instance, doesn't necessarily mean that the city of Eugene is going to benefit from the added revenue streams created by new jobs. So we have to keep our eye on the bigger picture like that. That we are disincenting people, and we have been doing it for years. And recently we've lost Grain Miller, and we've lost Glory B, and we've lost Rexius. So what makes us think that we're going to bring somebody in to replace them when we can't necessarily, we don't have the land, we don't have the capability to foster the growth of our homegrown companies. So that being the case, we need to look at what are our natural resources, and you're talking about food being a likely source of jobs for the future. I think that's a tremendous source, whether it's beer or wine. We've done great with alcohol production. There are other things that we can produce in town. My first job in Lane County was canning green beans. We don't have a green bean cannery locally anymore. My second job was picking cherries for a maraschino cherry plant that we don't have a maraschino cherry plant anymore. So we're not processing food, which disincenses us from growing food. So we need to keep our eye on the fact that we're not just going to get jobs by saying we want the jobs, and we're going to have to put in place the policies that allow people to want to come here or want to stay here.
Betty?
I also wanted the names of the committee members, and I've asked many times if anytime we get anything about a committee, I'd like to know who's on it, because I think that's significant. And if it's a matter of whether the committee's disagreeing, I'd like to know the names of the people who thought one way and another way. I would like to know the cost to Eugene of all these things that we're doing. Which ones are, if they're loans, are they being paid back? If it's grants, how much are we spending? And I don't think you have that right now. You look as if you do.
I have limited information. We have a contract with the EDEV, which is Enterprise Development, it's Entrepreneurial Development. It used to be Lane Micro Enterprise. That contract, the extension of the contract was $25,000. We have a contract with the Chamber of Commerce supporting the Academy program to work with fledgling businesses. I believe that contract is for $50,000.
You mean that's money we're giving them?
Actually, we're contracting for services. So the bulk of what was described is actually being done by other parties, and those other groups are also investing in those initiatives.
But it's costing the city money.
We are investing a small amount of money.
Okay. I'm confused about people saying Rexius left. I think they're still around.
They are.
And I don't think, I think
Glory
that,
Bees or Green
I
Millers.
think they went to a more appropriate spot for part of their enterprise.
Check your tax base.
And Glory Bee's still around too, isn't it?
They are.
You're telling me all these places that left, what? I thought they were still here.
Depends what you call here.
Well, okay. I think that what some people have said about it doesn't really matter where they locate, that should be in the most suitable place. Which brings me to one of my big concerns. If you want to, I think the food industry is great, and we should have places for canning and freezing and whatever, processing in any way, but you really need to protect the farmland in order to have food locally to do something with. And the farmland is not suitable for, should not be wasted on industrial uses. Thank you.
Okay, I put myself in the queue, and then we'll start the second round. I'm looking at, on page 23 of the PowerPoint, the presentation, where we're looking at a 1.6, we're looking at two different potential growth rates. One that would result in 8,000 new industrial jobs, and the lower figure would be 4,300 new industrial jobs. And then on the next page it says, the assumption is that the current share will continue through the different employment sectors. And so I'm just working backwards from this top, the higher figure, the 1.6 growth rate, yielding an ideal of 8,000 new industrial jobs.
Over 20 years.
That's 18% of the total. Commercials, 54%. That would be 24,000 jobs alone, commercial. Retail would be 10,000 jobs. Government would be 10,000 jobs, for a total of 52,000 jobs. That's over twice what the whole projection of all new jobs is. If we use this 1.6 growth rate for 8,000 new industrial, and if we assume that the current share will continue. So I see it. And then even if we use the lower figure, let's just say, roughly, that's 26,000 new jobs total. So I mean, that's quite a range. I think maybe it's unrealistic to assume that the share will continue at the same time assuming that we're going to have 8,000 new industrial jobs. I mean, I just see it. We're guessing. We just don't know, of course. Of course we don't know, and we have to have aspirations, and we have to set a goal, but this higher figure seems out of whack with those two assumptions. Seems like they just don't blend mathematically, is all I'm trying to say. So I don't really know what to do about that, but it's an anomaly here that it simply doesn't add up. The lower figure makes more sense if you're just looking at from the back end of that's a share of all the total, because we're going to end up with 26 total. That would be 20,000 prediction plus about 5,000 or 6,000 that we lost before, building up to, and then the 20,000 new, and the 5,000 that we lost during the downturn. So that one makes more sense to me. Then I had a couple questions. Well, I'll just wait till the second round. And Mike is first off in the second round.
Thank you, George. As was mentioned, though, that 18% really isn't real anymore. That was prior to the loss in manufacturing industrial jobs that we've seen over the last couple of years, so that's not a real number. And due respect to my friend Betty, it matters a great deal to me where the industrial job base is in our area. I would like it to be in Eugene. Why can't we be a leader in providing the best sort of jobs for people? It also provides sufficient tax base for us to provide the level of services that we say we'd like to. Because without that industrial base in our community, it's just simply not possible to provide the level of services that we say we'd like to provide. So to me, it matters a great deal that they locate here. And I think Councillor Farr was starting to get at what I was saying before, which is that this whole process isn't about the kind of benefits offered by which particular type of jobs. This process that we're going through is how much land shall we create and add to the UGB so that we have at least the capacity to add the industrial base that we need, both for our tax base and to provide the very best kind of jobs, which provide the very best kind of benefits. And we know that those are manufacturing, industrial, and traded sector jobs. We know that. So, while my friend Alan suggests that maybe the number isn't real that the JEO said of 26,000 new jobs in the next 10 years, maybe that's not real and we shouldn't accept it. So we should accept higher unemployment and we should accept less without putting ourselves in the position to at least try to accomplish that. This process is how much land shall we put aside so that we can at least potentially accomplish what we say we'd like to accomplish. Not, by what method shall we live with less? And I'd like to see us doing absolutely everything possible to set aside appropriate amounts of land for us to say, what will get us from here to there and become a regional leader in the kind of jobs that make sense for our community to have available, and the kind of tax base that allows for services beyond what others have in their communities, and to do so in an affordable way. And the only way that happens is if we put aside enough land in order to see our economy grow. We can't predict that. We can't say it absolutely will happen. But we can say that if we don't set aside that land, we know there's a one-to-one relationship. If we don't expand the UGB, we know that those jobs won't come. And I'd like to see us at least giving ourselves the chance.
Councilor Brown, can I just maybe help a little bit in the clarification between the JEO plan and Envision Eugene? The JEO plan was predicated on about a 1.4 plus or minus % annual increase for those 10 years. So that's how you got to that number. The total amount of jobs in Envision Eugene's over the 20 years, if you use the 1.6, is 45 to 50,000 jobs total, industrial and commercial. So I know we keep talking about the JEO. The JEO actually, if you were to double those number of jobs, you're probably pretty close to the 20 years for the Envision Eugene. So the total is probably closer to 45 or 50,000 jobs that we're looking for over the next 20 years, just to kind of...
So that was the JEOs for all of Lane County? That would make better sense with that higher number.
And yet I haven't gone back into the actual math, but just kind of in relative terms, the JEO plan and the Envision Eugene plan actually are pretty close. They line up. And so when we think about the Envision Eugene, it's really the 45 to 50,000 jobs over 20 years that we're looking for in order to meet that Envision Eugene. The JEO plan kind of is in sync with that, a little bit plus or minus. And so I just want to make sure that we don't just keep focusing on the 20,000 in the JEO plan, which is important, but it's more than 20,000 that we're trying to capture over the 20 years.
Well, okay, that's not really made clear. Pardon me. That's not really made clear in the power. I mean, it's just we have a 20,000 job figure here. I just assumed that was Envision Eugene.
So what we'll
You're saying this is the JEO?
We'll try to make it pretty clear on what the difference between those two are.
Because the difference is huge, depending on whether you're just talking about Eugene or whether we're just talking about the county at large. That puts a different slant on it. And I realize they're guesstimates. I understand that, but we're going to be making all these other decisions based on these guesstimates. So it's important to have them.
Clear on what those specific numbers are when we come back with that recommendation. So you'll.
Okay. All right, Andrea, second round.
It was still your 23 seconds.
Got off the stump there.
Okay, I wasn't sure. I didn't want to push you off.
Thanks.
I just kind of have a couple comments that have been made at this table. So I think that we do incentivize businesses to stay here. I know I personally have been supportive of the enterprise zone, and I've taken the hit for that politically many a time. And so I'm not sure what other tools we have in our tool chest, as it was put at the time, to encourage people. I mean, if they have visions of growing and we don't have what they want, then and what they're looking for is a totally different vision. I think of grain millers, and they actually want to grow their own food to mill. So, I mean, do we have that kind of land in our UGB to offer them? Is it reasonable if we did? I mean, the cost of it? Probably not. So I just kind of, I think that we are doing what's legally possible outside of a payoff that I think some cities have probably done and, in other communities to get people to stay there. But I don't think we have that kind of money in our in our bucket. And the other thing I wanted to comment about this, I'm really glad to see that the downtown has gotten a lot of energy and that we have so much going on in the downtown area. When are we going to change our focus of what we want to see different in the community? There's stuff naturally occurring around the university, but I got to tell you, on the west side, Highway 99, Four Corners, talk about brownfield, talk about underutilized land within our community. Not to say that people don't live in those areas, but I just think about if Four Corners. I mean, that area there is so underutilized, and that's all I can say. I mean, we think there's empty businesses there. There's housing that's substandard. There's some things happening. The best thing that's happened, not the best thing, the newest thing that's happened on the highways, in the last 5 years has been Sponsors Building, which is fine. I mean, that's good. It's a nice building. They're adding to the neighborhood. There's a couple new businesses, but, in reality, when you're looking at putting in the amount of energy that we put into downtown, if we put that into Four Corners, which is the gateway to the city, if you think about the airport, people coming down Highway 99, I think it would really make kind of change the landscape. And so I would just hope that kind of thought's happening along in this conversation.
We are actually going to be returning in early February with a work session devoted specifically to that topic of commercial redevelopment and development in areas exactly like that. So hopefully that will help answer some of those questions about what we can do.
Thank you.
Is that for the response?
Good job.
Ask and you shall receive.
It's about time. I'm done. Thank you.
Okay, Alan?
Yeah, just to play off of what Andrea said, the grain millers actually wanted 25 acres adjacent to their plant in the middle of the city, which isn't going to happen, to grow their own food to then. So that, to say that they left because we were not being, not accommodating them, I think is disingenuous. Glory B's still here, Rexius is still here. On one hand, you can't say that and have look at $100 million of development that's going on in downtown and say that Eugene is anti-growth and anti-business. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think it was just last year, the year before, we were voted 5th best place in the country for businesses to come to by Forbes magazine. It wasn't Birkenstock magazine, it was Forbes. and we're, what, 3rd lowest in the country in terms of business taxes. I mean, the environment for business is very good here, despite the rhetoric around it. I appreciate the passion, but be careful about the rhetoric, because what you're posing this as kind of a win-lose prospect, and that if you don't agree with some of the things said at the table, that you're anti-business, and that's not so. There is nobody at this table. Everybody at this table wants to see us prosper, wants to see jobs grow here, wants to have good family wage jobs, and that's what this is about. And so rhetoric aside, I think we're all on the same page, and I think we should remember that as we move forward. And what Envision Eugene is about is the appropriate planning to get us to where we can accommodate the vision that is articulated in Envision Eugene, and accommodate the land that we need to have the residences and the jobs. Eugene is going to be the job center. It always has been. I remember when we were looking at the transportation funding committee, one of the things that struck me as really interesting was that 50% of the people that work in Eugene don't live in Eugene, meaning that they don't pay any taxes for the roads through property taxes to help pay for our roads, even though they all use them. But it also means that the job center of this region is Eugene, and I think it will remain so, and we'll be able to grow off of the things that we're doing and the things that are embedded in Phase 2 of Envision Eugene, which is the policies and strategies that we will and incentives that we will create to make the vision of Envision Eugene real.
Okay, Pat?
Thank you. Councilor Zelenka is exactly right. Rhetoric has no place at the table. I really agree with you on that. I don't really believe that I'm in the process or in the business of providing rhetoric, just talking about things that really happen. So the disincentive we have is something that Councilor Clark has already covered. We just don't have the land available to attract the companies. And whether it's 25 acres of growing grain in the middle of town, or whether it's 25 acres of 3-story manufacturing, we don't have the land. And we see the charts from other places in the country, other places close by Eugene that have provided the land. So it's not necessarily the what Forbes magazine or Birkenstock magazine or whatever magazine says about Eugene. The fact is, people aren't coming here because they don't have a place to come. That's not rhetoric. Rhetoric involves talking about perhaps wanting to use existing industrial land but not having the transportation system to use the land that we have in place. That's rhetoric. So I agree with you, Alan. No place for rhetoric. Thank you.
Okay, I put myself in the queue again. Well, yeah, and there's just continuing this recent thread of the conversation is, at some point we have to realize that there are limits to growth, not imposed by us, not imposed by the city. I don't understand where Eugene gets this reputation of being anti-business. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. But I've heard, vice president of banks talk that way. And it's like I said, the next time one of your customers tells you that, you have him go talk to the city manager in the planning and development department. They'll prove to you that that's not true. But there are limits. There's limits. We're having the conversation about expanding the urban growth boundary. We can't go onto wetlands. We can't go onto class 1 and 2 soils. But the state says that. It's not us. It's not the city of Eugene. That's what the state says. So we can't go on steep slopes. You're not going to locate a factory on a steep slope anyway. You can't plop a factory down in wetlands, and you can't plop a factory down on these unbelievably productive, irreplaceable class 1 and 2 soils for growing food. So there's some limits that way, and it became apparent to me when we were looking at all the maps of where the housing's going to go, and you could kind of extrapolate, well, where were the areas where a factory could go? There's not that many. We could expand modestly, but really it's just not there. If we only look at Eugene only urban growth boundary, that's this whole business of pretending that Springfield doesn't exist. Well, while we have these conversations, it really, I think, puts a constraint on long-term regional planning, but I've said that before. I've got a couple specific questions about the first part of the presentation. The business development fund loans, 18 loans, 1.4 million, leveraging 14 million in private investment. Can we see a breakdown of those? Is there a list of the project and how much they were loaned, and then what the private investment of that?
Absolutely.
The leveraging. That would be illuminating, I think. Councilor Taylor's answered a couple of my questions, her questions. The Smart Ups Academy, the 20-step program to guide entrepreneurs to make presentations to investors. Is that available online, or could someone make a copy of?
Actually, part of that slide was taken from their internet presence, so all of that material is online.
Okay, online,
right.
And just go to the Chamber of Commerce?
Sure.
CFC, okay.
Actually, you could probably go to Smart Ups Eugene, and it would pop right
Smart
up.
Ups Eugene, okay, thank you. The Green Jobs Task Force. Mm-hmm. Opportunity area. One of them was identified as biomass production and transportation. What does that mean? Mass production?
Biomass production is energy production with...
in other words, the cogeneration plant?
Cogeneration would be an example of that.
The Seneca cogeneration plant. Okay. Has the task force published a report?
I saw a preliminary set of findings from them. I'm not sure that the final report has been published, but I'll certainly look into that for you.
Okay. I think my clock's working backwards, so I'll stop. I've got a couple more questions, and we'll go to the third round. And
thank you. I too.
For a second round, whenever you get a chance.
And you're next. Okay.
I too agree with my friend Alan that we should be careful of our rhetoric around this conversation. But for me, rhetoric, used in quotations here, as respectful as I can say it, is saying one thing and doing another. If we say we want to increase the job base in our community, And we need to be willing to do the things that we know will allow that to take place. We need to remove the constraints that we know are stopping us. We need to remove the constraints that we know are taking jobs from Eugene. And yes, Rexius is moving. And they couldn't find their land here and in the River Road area or in the Santa Clara area or in any other place where we have close-in farming. We weren't able to figure out, or 99, and excuse me, we weren't able to figure out where a good place would be for grain millers. That isn't to say that it couldn't have been done if we'd have had the capacity within our urban growth boundary to do so. We're going to face a $6 or $7 million shortfall next year in our budgeting process that we're going to start working on here pretty quick. And we all say we don't want to cut services. And if our rhetoric is that we all care about economic growth, we want to see jobs expand, and we want to see us be able to afford the level of services that we say we want to provide and not cut another 6 or 7 million out of them, then the only way that's going to happen is with increased valuable land within our UGB. We're not going to increase our property tax rate. We're not going to see a massive expansion of anything that creates value to the tax base in Eugene except for the capacity to add value to land within the city limits. That's the only way we'll see the tax base increase. So if we want the extra $6 or $7 million for the services, and we're not willing to talk about this and just spew so much rhetoric, we have to add the capacity for industrial growth within our community, and we have to add the land within the UGB to do it. Thank you.
Okay, Chris?
Thanks. It reminds me of, your mom always told you things never to talk about at the table was religion and politics. In Oregon, land use is also one of those topics. But this is the forum where we have to talk about it because it's where we have to make decisions about it. And the thing that's interesting to me is that I think everybody at the table is interested in what would it take to create the environment for economic health. And so I think it's really not that somebody at this table doesn't want economic health or economic vibrancy or whatever it is. I think it's really trying to find what is that balance that works for folks. What is the right balance? And for me, I think it really is an intriguing discussion because there's a lot of things that we have that we base this on factual, and then there's a lot of things that we take as articles of faith. We just believe them because that's how for many people it works. That's why I'm so dependent on the work that you do, because I'm trying to cut through just articles of faith that this is the way it is and try to get as much of the factual information, so when we try to find what is that right balance, it will be as much as possible based on the figures and the fact. That's why we're dependent on you. We're all dependent on you at this point. And I think we do need to accommodate industrial growth because that is where a lot of those really great jobs are going to come from. How much becomes the key question here? What is the amount? What is the amount we need that creates that environment for economic health? Because as our friends in Detroit said, government doesn't create jobs. Industry creates jobs. We simply create an environment where jobs can grow and flourish. That puts an obligation on us to make that environment rich. And Andrea talked about what are the incentives that we have in our tool belt. And I think that is one of those ways in which we can create an environment for health. And enterprise zone is one, but it occurred to me that another one, and I think this gets at the notion of where we are considered anti-business, is in the regulatory area. I think when many people talk about a government being anti-business, it is their reaction to what they consider to be excessive or restrictive regulation. Regulation is necessary. I mean, you can't just do anything you want to do. There has to be some regulatory level, but it has to be a regulatory level that makes sense. It has to be logical, reasonable, and understandable. And so I think that is one area where we could get enormous traction, in addition to the conversation about land. That is going to go forward. But another conversation we can have if we want to try to address the issue of economic environmental health, if we want to address the issue of how we can be more attractive to business without necessarily giving them money, you can give them a logical, reasonable, and accessible regulatory environment that says, we're not going to give away the farm and we're not going to create a dangerous or risky situation, but we're also not going to create a regulatory environment that by its very nature implies that we're anti-business. Because I don't think we're anti-business, but sometimes you can look that way. And I think that might be an area for us to also consider.
Okay. Anyone else in the second round? Or I guess we're in the third round now? Oh, I'll put myself in the queue. I had a couple more questions regarding the initial material in the AIS. The Chamber of Commerce initial cluster analysis, has that been published?
It has been published.
It's available online?
It may be available online, but I'll certainly look into that for
If
you.
it's not available online, could we see, could we get a copy of that in our next packet or so? Thank you. Let's see. My last question regarding this material was the National Careers Readiness Certificate. Lane County businesses have signed letters of commitment to hire
Actually,
who've
I'm
been
sorry.
certified in math and science skills, math and reading skills.
Commitment to use that as a qualification during the hiring process.
See?
So
Okay.
partly what this program does is it has young people and people who are trying to become employment ready value that type of training, that certification. Partly what it does is it matches employers who also value that training and certification.
Okay.
So the pledge, if you will, is made by employers to take that seriously and use that as a fundamental qualification.
Component in their hiring process. Okay. And it says to date, 932 people have received the certificates, passed the test for those certificates. Do you know how many of those people have been hired?
I do not.
No.
I
Is there
could see
any
if
way
there's...
of assembling that info, or
Yeah, I'll talk to the workforce partnership and
it
see
might be
if we can have
interesting to know
follow-up data.
how, just to check the progress of the program and see if it's being successful.
I'm on the board, and I know that it has been, I don't know if I have a number, but I have heard from people, and they brought people in to talk to us who have been successful because of this certificate. But I wanted before to add, it isn't just testing, it's training. Training
Okay.
people to be ready to take the test.
Okay.
And it has,
Shovel-ready
I've
people.
heard from employers at workforce meetings and from people who have had the certificates about how much it's valued, but I don't know the number.
Okay, great. Well, I was just curious. I mean, it's not crucial, but I'd like to know that it maybe, support it more. Okay, that's it for my questions. I just had just a comment or two. I think that we are very limited in our industrial land expansion. I mean, just looking at the maps in the the presentations previous, I'm not saying it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it, but I mean to the extent that we can. But I also think we never got to the brownfield remediation part. I don't recall if did we have a figure for brownfields within Eugene?
No, we don't.
Acreage?
And that's actually part of the
Is this
grant that they've
still
applied for.
being tabulated?
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, no, actually, the grant that we've applied for through the EPA, that's precisely what it's for. The existing brownfields inventory is done by the State Department of Environmental Quality, and it's really very limited. It's based on companies and property that they've had interactions with. The actual inventory of brownfields is much larger than that.
Well, yeah, I would
If we
imagine.
were successful in getting the grant, we would assess the brownfield inventory, and then we would have a chance to look at some of the deeper characteristics of those properties.
Because, I mean, just driving around town, you can see areas that are obviously brownfield sites, and no one's going to want to go in there and plop a business down unless it gets remediated. And we certainly don't have money to do that, so we're going to have to use some fairly massive federal help if they're willing to do it. And then I just had a comment. I'm sad to see Rexius leave because that's there, and Lane Forest Products are one of my frequently visited businesses for soil amendments and gravel and all kinds of stuff. And however, they're leaving, but they're going to develop that. That's coming up very soon. We're going to be voting on a rezoning for that property, and it'll be full of houses and apartments. And so their value will be added. One business is leaving, but I think a lot more value is going to be added to the tax base by the new housing that will be developed there. Anyone else? Well, I guess the meeting's over then. Thanks very much.
Thank you.